So 2019 actually had already seen quite a substantial slowdown in new generating capacity.
Sub-Saharan Africa is going to lose between $40 and $80 billion in output this year.
It's also, being 2019, now 2020, it's an interesting point to look at kind of the decade as a whole and compare it to the decade before.
So we have already seen a reduction in demand, meaning that the revenue of the sector is reducing and yet the costs are fixed.
In 2010, there was a big push for renewables to become an important part of the energy mix, and as we've just seen, they actually, if anything, have decreased.
We have an issue with undersupply in Africa, and you now link that with a revenue problem.
If you've got something that's on an issue that's being discussed at the moment, why not dial it in and we'll look into it.
We asked some questions on battery and thermal. For the battery industry to take off in Africa, what needs to happen? So how far do people think that LNG is in terms of years from now, from being a kind of wide-scale reality? If LNG is going to happen, how is it going to happen? How impacted has your business been by COVID-19? You can see where it's more concentrated in some parts of the industry than in others. For developers, there's a bit of a spread. Like overall, the impact has been just slightly more than average. For finance and investment, we have, as you might expect, less critically impacted, but a notable impact. For government, they're severely impacted. Construction also, the respondents we had said that they were quite severely impacted. Off-grid, actually slightly less. So we looked a little bit at where this impact was being felt. If you look at the utility scale developers, there are some interesting differences. Construction is more of a concern and has been more impacted in their view than on average, but less concerns over equipment supply and actually less concerns over payment challenges from off-takers as well. Over a 5-year time horizon, how these different areas might be still impacted. I think this is quite interesting. The developers are less concerned about utility finances. They're also much less concerned about financing for IPPs and for delays. I mean, in my experience, most developers think that they can go very fast if the conditions are right. So there may be a feeling that if the economy picks up, people can move to catch up very quickly.
We know the problems of building up companies' balance sheet borrowing come out on the basis of tariffs. Should we be looking at very different models to do this? I mean, should the World Bank and other donors, for example, be providing grants to help support consumers pay for their power, rather than which would then be charged at a commercial tariff?
And I've looked at this in the context of Uganda specific. No matter how much we optimize the cost of finance, that has a tariff impact of about 10-15%.
How does one then explain the renewable tariffs that we're seeing across the continent at the moment, with the likes of scaling solar and others? I mean, it could be the reverse in that the private sector is underpricing the risk, providing particularly low tariffs, and perhaps just haven't priced the risk appropriately.
This topic of take or pay, I mean, like any company or project company needs a certain amount of cash flow every month to pay the bills, and pay off the loan repayments, pay for operations and maintenance. And so we need to have clarity that money's coming in. And I think without the electricity market in place, there's no signals to tell us that this plant is needed. So we have to look to government to say, we're building a facility, is this needed?
And I had the pleasure for 7 years of my life working on Bujagali, the first round of Bujagali. So I spent many years, Madam Engineer, in the delights of Kampala and Jinja, working on that. And we had a fixed price EPC contract with the first contractor who was due to build Bujagali. And I think in the end, it was around a third of what the final EPC cost.
The first one shows from our database and the project flow across the power sector, so that's based on a database of over 6,000 projects, the amount of newly installed capacity that was added in the first quarter of this year.
From what we have seen, there is generally, there is a broad recognition, right, of the need to create that delicate balance between gas for domestic growth and industrialization and revenue generation for exports.
The interest in LNG imports into various geographies has increased once again.
Like most of the players in the energy sector, we are really looking forward of what could be the best development towards 2050, where we would have most probably a carbon-free environment.
From Wärtsilä, we have Bjorn Ulgro, Dafi Akpeneyi, the regulator in Nigeria, Hiskayas Tufera, the advisor to the minister in Ethiopia, Olusola Lawson, head of investment in West Africa at AIIM, Michael Charles Ball, who's project development manager at Wärtsilä, from African Infrastructure Investment Managers, AIM. We've got Ashwin West, Surieta Balwawako, the chief executive of the Energy Regulation Authority in Uganda, Paul Biggs, most of you will know, senior partner at the lawyers Trinity International, and Vivek Mittal, who's the chief executive of the Africa Infrastructure Development Association, AFIDA. Paul Eardley Taylor is down there in South Africa from Standard Bank. Chris Lavelle from Gas Strategies. Yemisi Awanuga from the Lawyers Templars. Francois Vosik from Wärtsilä. Greg van der Toren, the South African head of DMV.
Now I'd like to show you how to connect with the other participants. And the most obvious place would be to start here by seeing who the other delegates are. And it's listed in alphabetical order. But for example, you can also search. So if I wanted to connect with John Marks, I could either send him a connection request, or I could go straight and choose a slot to have a meeting after the webinar. So if it wanted it at 2:30, use AX networking message. And send the meeting request.